And so with that, I want to welcome candidate for Washington Superintendent, Erin Jones. And so thank you, Erin, and just make sure to unmute yourself. And we'll be happy to have you come on and tell us a little bit about how things are going in your neck of the woods.
So, first of all, thanks for having me today. The whole Palestinian conversation really resonates for me. I was just telling a story yesterday. I grew up, people judge a book by its cover, and when you see this 6 foot tall African American woman with an afro, people make assumptions about who I am and where I come from. And I was telling people yesterday that I grew up in the Netherlands, social democracy. We had 72 languages spoken in my school. And the day that I knew I was going to change the world is when I decided I was going to solve the Middle East crisis. And I was 9 years old, and there was a little girl in my class, and her dad was the Israeli ambassador, and the little boy next door, his dad was the PLO ambassador. And as a 9-year-old, I made a conscious choice. I'm going to learn to speak Arabic and Hebrew because I wanted to be part of the solution. And so I love what you're talking about, those relationships. And I think, the greatest desire that I have for our young people is that they learn how to communicate with each other. And that means they have to learn to speak different languages. They have to interact with people from all over the place. And I think one of the greatest gifts I was given as a kid was this opportunity to meet people from all over the world: Muslim, Jewish, Christian, Orthodox Christian, Catholic, atheist. And we had to interact with each other and learn that we're each human beings, and how do we get along and really work for the common good. And that's really what I want for our young people in our public schools today, for every single young person.
Yeah, excellent. And you mentioned public schools, so some of our viewers may not be familiar with what exactly a Washington State Superintendent of Public Schools is, or what they do. If you could tell us just a little bit about what that role
Sure.
is for folks.
Sure, it's interesting. I don't know that there is an actual rule book for that job. So I just read an article that whoever runs that office kind of decides the role of the state superintendent. But how I choose to define it, after having worked for two different state superintendents, is I need to be the primary advocate with both the federal and the state governments to make sure that we are getting what we need for public education. But I would say, even more importantly than that, I need to be a visionary. We haven't had a visionary in this role for a very long time. And I believe that when we have no vision, we end up nowhere. And so I believe my greatest role is, how do I gather experts, and that includes parents and students, to really craft a vision, a plan, a roadmap for our state, so that as we're making decisions, the people of our state have crafted this roadmap for where we want public education to go. And I think that's really been absent. And so state lawmakers are making decisions every day without a roadmap, just chucking spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks and what doesn't. And what I know as a mom and as an educator is that that's not good for any of us.
Yeah, I'm curious what some of the things that you think you and others have identified that are issues slash problems that we have identified, but we haven't figured out how to solve. And then I'm also curious about what you think we're doing right as on the educational front. I know we may be lacking vision, and the execution has been lacking. Are there things that we are executing well, and how so?
Yeah, it's funny. I talk about myself as a treasure hunter. So I think one of the things we haven't done well as a state is really hunt for the treasures, because there are tons of them. I have spent the last year and a half traveling across the state looking for treasures, and there's a tiny little district called Bridgeport, Washington, 97% ELL, 97% free and reduced lunch. The average kid there lives 3 Latino families to one single wide trailer home, and yet they're graduating 95% or better of their student population. Every single kid takes one AP class at least. Out of their graduating class last year of 47 kids, I want to say 4 of them graduated also with their AA degrees, and over half had taken more than one AP class. And so I look at examples like that and I say, you know what, if it can be done there, why can't it be done in Seattle? Why can't it be done in Federal Way? There are examples of great models of school across our state, but because we don't tell the stories, people have no idea they exist. And so that's really what I want to do, is instead of talking about where we're broken, because I think we do a lot of that, we talk about a lot about how education is broken. I believe we focus on what we talk about. So I want to focus on what's working well and highlight those things that are working well. And I also want to focus on equity. We haven't had anyone in this office who can really talk about equity, and equity is something that I'm really passionate about. My whole teaching career in this state was in Title I, high poverty, very diverse schools, and I closed gaps in my classroom. In our building, we closed gaps. So it absolutely can be done, and it must be done. And we have hundreds of thousands of kids who absolutely depend on us doing the right work for them. And one of my mottos, the reason that I run, is that zip code, race, and home language can no longer be the greatest predictors of the kinds of school experiences our kids have. And I absolutely believe there are solutions to that, but we have to have the political will, and as a state agency, provide the kind of support that's necessary to do that work.
Yeah, I've always found it curious whether it's we're talking about college or we're talking about the K through 12 process. The idea that if your parents were not successful, that we should limit the quality of your education, and
Yeah.
the floor will be extremely low. That always seemed like a perplexing idea to me. And then it's almost hard to argue or to discuss with somebody who then points to a dirt floored classroom in Africa, like raising money for desks, performing well in those conditions, and saying, well, what's wrong with these students? And I think that there's so much going on there that it needs so much unpacking. I don't think we have time for all of it today or anything, but I think you really capture a very important sentiment there, and I'm glad that you touched on
Yeah,
that.
it's it's critical. I think it's funny. We talk about being progressive in the state, and yet um, there's so many ways that we're not progressive. And I think one of the dangers of Washington State is we like to think we're colorblind. We like to think we're better than the South, and yet in many ways we're far behind. And we need to acknowledge our weakness. We need to acknowledge our bias and prejudice. We're not going to get beyond it until we can own it and address it.
Absolutely. And I know as far as some of the things that are going on in our state currently to address some of these issues and that have uh, gotten definitely a lot of attention from both sides are charter schools. And I don't know if you happen to catch it, but there was a piece on John Oliver recently about charter
Yes.
schools, and there's obviously been a lot of flack going both ways about it. I'm curious if you could elaborate a bit to us about your opinions on where charter schools fit into your vision of the future, as you were mentioning earlier.
Well, to be honest, it pains me a little bit that we've spent so many billions of dollars for and against charter schools, because in our state it's about 100 kids to 1,000 kids. And I feel like it's distracted us from the 1.5 million other kids that are in our state. As a private citizen, I voted against charter schools because I felt like if we're not fully funding the schools that currently exist, charter schools shouldn't even be on the table. That being said, we have to acknowledge that in our large urban centers, we are not serving our Black and brown children well. And so um, I don't believe charter schools are the answer, but I do believe we've got to try some new models. And I think, having worked in Tacoma public schools for almost 7 years of my career, we are doing some great things there with innovation in the context of our public school system. We have a school of the arts, we have a school of math and science, we have 2 Montessori academies, we're opening an engineering school next week, I think. We've done some really great work, and we are graduating students at higher rates than any other school, and the same demographics of our school district. And we have more students of color in our district than white students. So I have to be the treasure hunter. Where are the models that are already working? Why would we set up brand new systems if we do have models that are working? Let's replicate those models, tell those stories, give people a roadmap for how to do that work well. But I think we can't just say hell no to charter schools and not have an option for the students that we're not serving. So my message has been yes to innovation. Let's make sure that we hold ourselves accountable, and let's make sure that we really focus on making sure that all students get support, not just 1,000 students. But I think the whole charter school conversation has sucked up so much of the energy and attention, and it's really to the detriment of the 1.1 million kids that exist in the state that aren't getting any attention at all.
And I think the underlying, if I'm reading between the lines there correctly, is that charter schools are not the solution. They
Correct.
at best they may be an experimental uh, location to try a new model, but the idea that it's a long-term solution or that they're going to be a large supplement is faulty as you would see it.
At best.
Okay.
Correct.
All right.
Yes.
And I think we're going to have an opportunity. I'm going to go ahead and bring on some more folks if you can stick with us for a little bit longer.
Yeah.
I know, as we talked about, Michael Webline has a slightly different perspective on charter schools, so I'm going to let him, if Michael's ready there. Sorry about that. Will be. I always get confused between the two. Sorry. He's going to join us and possibly take a slightly different angle and talk a little bit about innovation in schools, which I think is also an important aspect. So it looks like we're ready to get you on there, and go ahead when you're ready, Mike. I don't think we're getting audio, it seems. I don't know if your mic is not selected correctly there. We'll sort that out briefly, but we also had, I know Eric wanted to get in here and speak also, so while we sort out the audio issues with Michael, we'll bring Eric on briefly here. Go ahead, Eric. And I think it might be on Dave's side now.
No, did we good?
Okay, no, okay, there we go.
No, that was me. That was me.
All right.
Don't blame Dave. Blame it on the rain. So I just wanted to thank Erin for joining us. As you know, and I kind of talked to you a little bit, Erin, about this. I have a 10-year-old son, so education is obviously very important to me, and just so happens that he is interracial. And so I was wondering what kind of things you think should be done to serve those types of students. And I want to tell you a little bit of a story that he experienced at school and something that's been kind of going on. And it's kind of hard for me to talk to him about it because I'm very, very, very fair-skinned. So he basically had a student come up to him and kind of start making fun of him for not being white. So now he's had this big thing where he always tries to prove that he's half white to everybody. And he'll like pull up his shirt and show that his stomach's wider than his arms, pull up his pants shorts. And he is at I consider it pretty progressive school, but it still doesn't seem like they've squashed this kind of element from the schooling. I was just wondering if you had any kind of ideas on addressing those type of situations in schools and how to better serve children and students of color.
I got lots of ideas. I mean, I have spent 20 hours in the last 3 days training teachers on how to serve students of color. So I'm running for office, but I'm also teaching teachers because I think it's important. It's that important to me. Here's the interesting thing about Pierce County. So Pierce County, South King County has the largest number of biracial students in the country, primarily because of Joint Base Lewis McChord. And so what that means is we have all these students that nobody has ever really addressed before. And as you know, as a white dad, you don't understand his experience, nor would his mom as a black woman, because neither one of you are biracial. And so what I found as a biracial teacher when I taught in Tacoma is I was the very first biracial adult any of these young people had met before. And so I had a unique perspective for them on, you know what, I'm not all black and I'm not all white. I'm nothing and I'm everything. That's what I used to tell my students. I used to write poetry about this. I am nothing and I'm everything all at the same time. I train teachers on this stuff because we have got to. I think one of the dangers of Washington State is we don't like to talk about race. We like to think we're post-racial out here, and the reality is we're so far from post-racial. Just look at our discipline data, and then tell me we're post-racial. I mean, you look at our justice data, our incarceration data. We are not a post-racial state, and until we're willing to acknowledge that we have bias and prejudice, we are not going to move ahead. And that's actually how I start every training. I tell everybody in the room, every one of you in this room is prejudiced and biased. And until you're willing to own that, we're not going to move forward. So one of the things that the state has now made mandatory is that if you want to become a teacher, you have to take cultural competence training. Here's the challenge, though. None of the professors were trained. So you can mandate that, but the professors in the teacher colleges weren't trained. So there were 8 of us who were seen as experts. I wouldn't call myself an expert exactly, but we had to go and train the professors who were going to train the teachers. But the reality is in our state, we don't have a whole lot of people who can provide that training, but I believe it's absolutely critical. if we are colorblind, we are not going to serve our students well. Being colorblind is an asset. That's not a good thing. And really helping our educators understand that part of being an effective educator is acknowledging our difference and celebrating. I don't want to be tolerated. Don't just tolerate me. I want to be embraced and valued. Every 10-year-old wants to be valued, wants to know that they're special, that they have value, that they have meaning.